We are finally at the very last lap of the Flame Chase journey. The 1,000-year sacrifice Tribios has made, the countless Chrysos heirs guided by Aglaya, the sacrifices of Maidi, Anaxa, and Casteris, and even the lie Cypher told to literally hold up the sky. Every drop of blood, every death, and every city left to ruin has been to create this very moment, an opportunity we see at the conclusion of the current Trailblazer quest. At the very end of the 3.3 story, Phainon finally reaches the Matrix of Genesis, and all that's left to do is to invoke the miracle. Everything they have worked for will now bear fruit, and Amphoreus will finally be saved. But will Phainon actually do it? Will the Deliverer really do what everyone is expecting him to, or will he instead become the Titan of disappointing others? In this video, I want to discuss what might come after the events of 3.3. Phainon's next steps, and the Ravager stuck in Amphoreus' basement. Before I get into that, however, if you are interested in more Honkai Star Rail content, do consider subscribing to the channel. As the topic of this video will heavily reference the ending of 3.3, there will obviously be a bunch of spoilers. So if you haven't cleared the story yet, then I'd suggest doing that first, otherwise consider this your obligatory spoiler warning. Before I get into my theories on how the story might progress, let me just do a quick recap for you story skippers out there. At the very end of 3.3, Phainon finally reaches the last point of his journey. As he enters the vortex of Genesis, he is met by an unexpected individual, Lygus the Anti-Kytheran. Despite Phainon's initial suspicions, Lygus assures him that he is only there to witness Phainon's decision. Phainon continues to question his motives given Lygus' disinterest in the miracle thus far, but Lygus then reveals that this isn't the first heroic moment he has witnessed. He claimed to have been there when the mountains were first created and when the seas were first filled, and as he has always done, will once again witness the hero trigger the miracle. While the journey has been long and hard, it is at this critical juncture that Phainon begins to doubt and falter. He mentions that the miracle and the flame chase journey has not once brought peace or justice to his friends and loved ones, but instead only suffering. With Lygus' claims that this is a cycle that has repeated numerous times before, Phainon starts to wonder whether this is really the best way. Upon hearing this, Lygus appears amused and wonders if this endlessly repeating story will now instead have a different ending. It is here that Cyrene suddenly appears and pretty much confirms that things are about to change and tries to convince Phainon that this is really what he wants as well. While the story does end on a cliffhanger, the ending pretty much suggests that Phainon now has different thoughts about how he might want to progress. That said, there's really only two outcomes or ways this can really play out. Either Phainon chooses to invoke the Matrix of Genesis and reset everything, or he doesn't. If he chooses to complete his mission, everything is reset, the demigods become the next generation of titans, and this whole thing starts all over again. Maybe the Nameless will attempt to save those they have lost, but given Amphoreus is technically saved, they are perhaps free to move on to the next location, once March wakes up that is. It's a pretty straightforward ending overall. However, with the way 3.3 ended and Cyrene now whispering into Phainon's ears instead of Aglaya, there is a very real possibility that Phainon will end up abandoning his mission. He might instead choose a completely alternative solution to the problems Amphoreus currently faces, and this is where we get into the theories. So if Phainon decides not to trigger the miracle, how would this actually play out? Well, I think we can get a general hint from Lygus' own words, as slightly before Cyrene appears, Lygus mentions that Phainon will bury the old world with the core flames, bringing all things into a grey unknown. Phainon himself then says that if whatever lies ahead is pure chaos, he will tear it all apart and usher in the first ray of blazing sunlight. In Greek mythology, chaos is said to be the primordial abyss that existed before everything else. It is a literal void from which all of creation eventually sprang from, and why it holds the potential of all creation. Both Lygus and Phainon's dialogue suggest that instead of resetting everything, Phainon might use the power of the core flames to reshape the world into a true paradise. To claim that he will tear apart chaos itself might be Phainon indirectly saying that he will create a new world, one separate from the prison or curse of the miracle. Instead of a depressing, never-ending cycle, Phainon might instead choose to repair all the damage to Amphoreus, cast out the Black Tide, bring back the people he has lost, and return Amphoreus back to a golden age. Realistically, this fantasy world would be a far better choice for Phainon, given the alternative is one where his friends are basically still dead. Both Ligus and Cyrene seem to also corroborate this idea somewhat, as Ligus mentions Amphoreus' story might be turning a new page, while Cyrene mentions that this will be a romantic story like none that has come before. Plus, not to get too meta about this, but if Phainon does end up reviving everyone, then it might also include Hycilence and Ceridra, who we know are gone in the current story but are likely to be playable. So bringing them back in 3.4 would perfectly align with their potential release, but of course, I don't know if that will actually happen. In any case, you might then say that if this was truly an option, why wouldn't the people who came before do the same thing? Well, I think that Phainon has two things that those past heroes didn't have: Cyrene and the Scepter. You know, that immensely powerful machine capable of doing practically anything? So it's very much a possibility that Phainon can indeed achieve this, perhaps with some guidance from Cyrene. Both of them will use all the power at their disposal and usher in a utopia for Amphoreus, bringing about a new golden age, and everything ends happily ever after. Well, not really, because I think that while this might work out initially, things will start to become far, far worse. Now, the first problem would be the instant rift created between those who would accept this new world and the Miracle of Genesis purists. Those like Aglaya, Hycilence, Ceridra, and maybe even Tribios may see this as a complete perversion of the flame chase journey they worked so hard to achieve. This might end up creating a situation where allies and friends end up at odds with one another. It's possible that Phainon will face some opposition from those faithful to the journey, those who dislike the Chrysos heirs, and even those that have vested interest in the cycle continuing. Some might not even accept Phainon and Cyrene, who are now functionally their gods. But this isn't even the biggest problem, because as you might recall, there is one other issue here: the Lord Ravager they have chained up in the basement of Amphoreus. Now, I've talked about the Amphoreus Ravager in two separate videos already, so I'm not really going to repeat anything here, but the latest idea is that they might be Iron Tomb. You can go check out my other video on why I think that is, but regardless, this Ravager might be the true reason for the ultimate collapse of Phainon's paradise. You see, I have this weird feeling that the Miracle of Genesis isn't just a mechanism to reset the world of Amphoreus. I think that it also serves an additional, more important purpose. What if the miracle isn't just to reset Amphoreus, but also meant to keep the Ravager trapped or weakened? This might sound completely crazy, but just hear me out. In that other video, I speculated that Iron 2 might be the Ravager in question, and that the Black Tide is really a manifestation of their powers. Think about what the Black Tide looks like and how it affects things. It literally appears like a corrupting virus that mutates anything it touches, and physical objects affected by it appear like corrupted data. Iron Tomb is said to be able to corrupt the technology of other planets, so the Black Tide might actually be a manifestation of their powers or a weapon that they wield. This becomes even more relevant if Amphoreus is really a giant simulation, which has been hinted several times already and covered in yet another one of my videos. The only way we have removed the Black Tide in the game is through the use of the Core Flame's powers, but even then, as it gets closer to the end of Amphoreus, the Black Tide has become difficult if not impossible to remove. So it's very likely that the Miracle of Genesis that uses the Core Flames is not meant to save Amphoreus, but to hold back the powers of the Ravager, more specifically the Black Tide, and the reset is just a byproduct of that. This is why I think Phainon's Little Paradise won't last very long, because by not triggering the Miracle of Genesis, Phainon has essentially set the stage for the eventual release of the Ravager. Sure, maybe with the Core Flames, Phainon can cleanse the Black Tide to a certain degree, but like we have seen in-game, this likely only works on a localized level. Otherwise, if the Core Flames were all we needed to clear the Black Tide, we could have easily pushed it back. On top of that, Phainon doesn't even know the Ravager is there, so he might not see the problem of pursuing a different path. When the Ravager is finally released, this is when the story will reach its penultimate turning point. Phainon will realize his mistake, we help him redeem himself, everyone bands together, and we defeat the Ravager. One final evidence to this idea being possible is the fact that despite the Trailblazer having technically died on Amphoreus, the Stellaron Hunters have not once intervened. Given Elios's powers, you could say that they knew the Trailblazer would be fine, but maybe this whole debacle is something that needs to happen, like a canon event or something. At the end of the day, one of the main goals of the Stellaron Hunters is to defeat Nanook, and what better way to weaken the God of Destruction before their final confrontation than by allowing one of their generals to be defeated? So it might be that Phainon's fall from grace, the release of the Ravager, Phainon's redemption, and the defeat of the Ravager is something already in Elios's script. Something Elio has foreseen and allowed to play out because it benefits them. To intervene anytime earlier in amphoreus' story might have prevented this outcome and why we don't see them appear at all. So to summarize, following the cliffhanger in 3.3, I think that Phainon will abandon the Miracle of Genesis, choosing to instead side with Cyrene. Both of them will end up using the core flames and perhaps the scepter to create their own version of paradise. This goes great at first, but quickly fails when the Ravager ends up being released. We redeem Phainon from his misguided attempts at saving the world, which by the way is super similar to what Kevin Kaslana would try to do, and everyone then works together against the true adversary, the Lord Ravager. Upon their defeat, the universe becomes a safer place and amphoreus achieves true freedom with no further need for the miracle or the cycles. Of course, there are plenty of other possibilities, and this is only one of my guesses. Maybe Cyrene ends up using and throwing Phainon away. Maybe we go back in time to the past and meet Hysilence and Ceridra. Maybe Phainon ends up pressing the big red button after all to reset amphoreus. Or maybe the Lord Ravager isn't even the true threat here and Phainon ends up being the bad guy. There are a myriad of other possibilities, and what I've shared here is just one out of those thousands of other possibilities. Plus, I don't even know what Cyrene really plans to do here. So take what I share here with a grain of salt, as it's mostly just for fun while we wait for 3.4. All in all, the story of the Flame Chase journey has honestly felt a little bit rushed to me, but I'm genuinely excited for what might happen next. I mean, I haven't even really considered the other factions that are here and what they might want out of all of this. But of course, we will have to wait and see how it will actually develop. Hopefully, this video was entertaining enough to scratch that lore itch some of you might have after playing the 3.3 story. So with that, I'll end the video here. If you did find the video entertaining, do consider liking and subscribing to the channel. Thanks so much for watching, and as usual, have a nice day.